Hello everyone and welcome to the F1 Era, your weekly F1 catch-up brought to you by Nerve Podcasts and Nerve Radio. I'm Eden Hannigan.
I'm Rebecca Coulson.
And I'm Honor Den.
And we are officially in our F1 era.
But before we get into last weekend's events, let's all talk about how our F1 era started. So, Rebecca, how did you get into Formula One?
I think it was pretty much instilled in me from birth, to be honest. But sport's always been a massive part of me growing up. My dad will literally watch every single sport that's on TV, even like the really niche ones no one really watches. And F1 would always be on. And then one day I was like, do you know what? It was the Hungarian Grand Prix and I was like, I want to watch it with you. And I really loved it. And since then I've been obsessed, more obsessed than him.
Yeah. I know that feeling. What about you, Eden?
Yeah, I think mine's the same. Like, I can't remember a specific kind of time, or I think because it was always on when I was younger, but the first thing I vividly remember was, I don't know if you guys recall the Mark Webber flipping in the streets of Valencia. I think it was back in 2010.
Ooh, yeah.
Like, that was
8 years old.
Yeah. Yep, pretty much. And it was just yeah, I mean, seeing the danger and things of that, like, I mean, it was quite interesting as a child, but I mean now, yeah, still stuck to the sport to this day, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing at the moment. Not quite sure I was a Ferrari fan, but I mean, I'm sure we'll get into that later in the episode. So
I'll be honest, full transparency, I was a really big Pussycat Dolls fan as a kid, and I would only join my dad if I knew Nicole Scherzinger was there that weekend, which is probably why I'm a Lewis fan. But from then I just got addicted. It's gripping. I think it always makes you come back, even if the weekend wasn't that great. You're still there the next week.
So, do you guys want to go into talking about this weekend's results?
Yes, over to Austin.
Rebecca was quite happy, wasn't she? Max Verstappen double.
Another great win for Verstappen, I can't lie. I'm loving every week of it.
But I mean, Max had a great weekend, but he did have a few choice words to talk about in the sprint formats in particular, because I can't quite remember what the quotes was, but he was basically saying it was kind of boring for him.
He said that he doesn't get excited by the sprint weekends anymore, and he feels like the magic of a Sunday morning and knowing who's going to win is lost.
Well, it's quite known that Max can be quite opinionated. You know, he doesn't shy away from saying what he thinks. But I do have to agree with what he said about the sprints. I do feel like, I hesitate to say they're like pointless at the minute, but the fact that this old sprint format, it did take the starting grid for the race, and I personally felt like that was a lot more exciting than what we have now, because although it contributes to championship points, it's sort of become a separate spectacle to the actual race, and I don't really know if you could call it a sprint qualifying or anything.
It's like just an extra day day in the race weekend.
It also kind of feels like an exhibition in as a way, and I mean, I think it would be great if it was a way to get new fans in, but I mean, they don't stream the races any differently. They're on the same subscription services and things like that. I mean, they're pretty much just a dress rehearsal for who's going to win on the Sunday. You know, like Max said, you can pretty much tell what the result's going to be from that, barring some kind of incident. And I think for me, that when the sprints were first introduced, I was quite excited because I thought, firstly, more racing, but also the thing that I first noticed about the sprints was they took away an extra practice session. And I think at first that was quite good because generally speaking, a lot of people have said in the past about Formula One that they, without an extra session of practice, generally speaking, the sprint, the races on the Sunday are far more exciting. And I think when they were first introduced in 2021 and a couple of times in 2022 as well, I'd say they were definitely a lot more interesting than what they could have possibly been.
Yeah.
And I would say like Monza 2021, Brazil 2021,
Brazil,
you know, they were some brilliant races.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think they would have possibly been a bit less memorable had they potentially had the practice that the sprints kind of play for.
I almost think if they are going to do it and it doesn't contribute to Sunday, then they should have the sprint shootout qualifying on the Friday and at least leave a day, because if they're only leaving a couple of hours, we all know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's been 2 hours.
I agree.
We know the results already. At least with the actual race, we've got Saturday's qualifying. You've got a whole night to build up the excitement and what could happen, and a whole night of quick fixes to the engines.
Yeah.
There's a lot more at play. If it did contribute to the race weekend, it'd be a lot more exciting.
Just saying, there's obviously that risk with the sprint races where drivers don't really want to push that hard. They don't want to destroy the car, you know, have like massive changes needed overnight. And I feel like that means that some drivers don't push as hard as they maybe could.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
There's not as many points available as there are in a Grand Prix, and strategically, is it worth competing?
Yeah.
Exactly, and especially for, I believe they had a discussion with James Wells, the Williams team principal, this weekend, because they qualified really low on the Sunday grid, but on the sprint shootout they were kind of in a fairly decent position, and I believe they thought there was a chance potentially for Alex Albon to get some points. I don't think that happened for him. He was 9th. I'm not sure if he did get a point for that. I can't quite remember how the sprint format goes.
Yeah, I think it's
1 to 8. I believe
yeah.
it's 1 to 8, like just how the old F1 races used to be way back when. But I mean, I know that they said that they thought maybe there was a chance for them, but I mean, you look at the results and barring some disqualifications, they're pretty much the same names in there that you'd seen on the Saturday to the Sunday. So there's no real differences there, and I just think that it's something that maybe the FIA need to look at, because they've said that the format's stale. You've had Max, Lewis, Carlos Sainz has come out and said that they need to do something differently and maybe run it as a standalone championship, maybe do the sprints as a separate championship and make it multi-format like different sports are.
I do agree with Max. I do think that the sprint should have some effects on Sunday's race, because if you do look back at things like Brazil 2021, that was a 2-day fight from Lewis. It was a fight from last to P5, and then he knocked down to P8, and a fight from there to first on Sunday. But it's a 2-day thing. It's not just like you say, like they're not just given a half-hearted effort on the Saturday to save their tyres and things for Sunday.
Yeah.
I think if we were to see that still now, it would be a lot more interesting to see the drivers fight back, especially those affected by penalties and crashes, and see how they...
Of course, we mentioned that Verstappen has completely dominated both races. But something that we do need to talk about is potentially Red Bull's nearest challengers now in the orange, or the papaya, should we say, of the McLaren. And I mean, it was a tough weekend for Piastri. You know,
an unlucky one.
Yeah, he DNF'd in the main race because he was hit by Ocon.
Yeah.
I can't remember which of the cars, but I believe it might have been Ocon's that had a hole in the car.
Yeah, he did retire as well.
Yeah, they both retired from that incident on lap 1, and then he was also quite unlucky in the sprint, coming home in 10th. But it was a good weekend for Norris.
It's a shame, really. He had a good weekend last week. You know, he's not... I think he's got real good potential.
He's had an amazing season, I think, for a rookie, Piastri.
I think potentially the best rookie season since Lewis Hamilton. That's what a lot of people are saying.
I 100% agree with that.
And I mean, Lando, of course, is once again showing as well why he is, being touted as possibly the next Lewis Hamilton, because in the McLaren, as they've improved this season, he was 4th in the sprint, and then he had some great race pace in that. And again, we thought, starting from 2nd on the Sunday race, we're going to potentially see a Norris win. Wasn't quite meant to be for him this weekend. 3rd on the track, 2nd in the main race. But what do you guys think of McLaren's improvement over the season?
Over the season is incredible. I mean, they started out so poorly, but you look at where they were, especially in Silverstone, and that was incredible. P2 and P3 in qualifying. I think you can really see the improvement they've done to their cars. They sort of overtook, originally in the season it was Aston Martin that were going to be that competitor. They've completely replaced them.
Yeah, I do feel like it's quite unlucky for Norris, because it seems like every time he gets really close to a win, he just misses out on something. But I do feel like they have Piastri and Norris, and they're both quite young drivers as well. They both have lots of fire in them, and I think it could be, over the next couple of years, really good for McLaren.
Yeah, me too. I think that sort of generation, you've got the older drivers like Lewis and Alonso, and once they move on, I reckon there's a good field of competitors there for a new world champion.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I definitely agree. And just to throw a little bit of jeopardy into the mix, we're going to ignore the sprint races here, because I know obviously what happened in Qatar with Piastri winning that sprint race. Who do you think is going to get a main race win first? Because my opinion on this has changed as the season's gone on. Do you think Piastri, or do you think Norris will get that main win for McLaren first?
It fluctuates, because I really do think Piastri has the drive, and I think Norris wants it. I really think he does, but like you say, there's always one little nugget that just makes him drop back and doesn't quite grasp that win. But I think Piastri could take it. I really do.
That's where my thought was going as well, and especially with the backing of potentially one of the best never to be champions, Mark Webber as well, who he did say this weekend he's going to have an off weekend every now and then, but it doesn't put away with the great season that he's had.
You know, Max and Lewis, they've all had off weekends, but you know, it doesn't like disregard their talent. It could just be, like you say, like a racing incident with Ocon, and that's why we didn't see him so high up on the track this week.
I'm hoping that Norris gets a win at some point, because you can see he's really been trying hard. But you can't help but think, like, the way Piastri has just risen up so quickly compared to Norris has been at McLaren for a while. I feel like Piastri just has that ability in him. He can really take the win.
I think he has the confidence as well, because you usually see after a race when Norris hasn't done so well, he's really hard on himself, especially on social media. He's always apologising, and it's actually quite sad to see, and I hope that, like, that hasn't knocked his confidence and he still believes he can get it himself.
We're going to move on to a bit that makes me a little bit heated.
Our resident Ferrari fan.
I'm not even going to claim that team anymore. I am a Charles Leclerc fan, and a Charles Leclerc fan only, because that team, how many times have we said it over not even recent months, recent years, you know, it's been since 2007 was the last time they won a Drivers' World Championship. 2008 was the last time that they won a championship in general with the team's title. And you just look at the way that they've managed some races, they're not going to win a championship potentially for the next 15 years, because this weekend they had the faster driver on pole. The faster driver was on pole. Charles Leclerc got another pole position. And once again, I think we all knew kind of going into the race that it wasn't going to be converted. We knew it was going to add to that kind of record that he has. Yeah. He now also apparently has the most pole positions without winning a world championship as well, which is a stat that blows my mind.
Well, yeah.
But I don't know how Ferrari do it. Firstly, thinking that the one stop would work after seeing the amount of tyre degradation in a sprint race, you know, you've already had kind of that data to kind of process and things like that, and yet they've not taken any of that.
They've not adapted to it, no.
Yeah, I mean, Charles said that he spoke to Pierre Gasly on the grid, and he asked Pierre what he thought about a one stop, and Pierre was like, "There is no way this is happening." And yet, you know, Charles did that, and he was very kind on his tyres. You know, they said that he potentially had the best management on the grid, and they put signs onto the more aggressive two stop. I saw them pit signs, and I thought his strategy is going to make him undercut Leclerc here, and he did. Then he obviously did his second stop, and he was coming at him again, and I just thought, I mean, I was there in the stands in Silverstone in 2022 when they did that pit stop behind the safety car, and I'm still struggling to forgive them for that moment, you know, seeing your driver so close to a win in front of you and them taking that away.
I think it is a shame, because I think they're both such good drivers, you know, they both have the talents and the ability to drive to take them very, very far. And I think Charles Leclerc does have it in him to be a world champion. It's just a shame that the one thing setting them back consistently is Ferrari's team strategy.
Yeah, and I think they got rid of the former strategist this season, and yet nothing's changed. You know. And
do you think the change of leadership with Binotto going to Vassar, do you think that?
Well, I originally, as a Charles fan, I saw Vassar come in and I was like, this is brilliant. You know, he worked with him at ART in GP3. He worked with him at Sauber when he first came into F1 in 2018. I thought, this is going to be great. Charles Leclerc is going to be the team leader. He's going to be the number one like he should have been since he stepped foot into Ferrari in 2019. I know immediately he couldn't be the team leader because you have a four-time world champion and Sebastian Vettel was his teammate. But, you know, since Sebastian Vettel left Ferrari, Charles Leclerc is your number one driver. He's been in your academy since God knows how long. He won the 2016 GP3 championship. He won the 2017 F2 championship and dominated. He had a great rookie season in 2018, which made them sign him. Second youngest ever Ferrari winner, won Monza, you know, things like that a lot of other top class Ferrari drivers haven't been able to achieve. And it just makes me so mad as a fan who has, you know, watched his progress since he was in F2 and thinking like, this guy's going to be world champion, this guy could beat Max Verstappen.
Do you think he'll leave?
Machinery. It's tough because I just think he has too much loyalty to that team. He's always said, I want to be in the red car. It's the red car that I was watching. Yeah. And apparently there was rumours earlier this season about Red Bull contacting him.
I remember those, yeah.
I don't think Red Bull would be the best move. You know, the amount of great talented drivers they've had in that second car that hasn't worked.
I don't think it'd be a good move with Max because I think they are very clearly going to be two big competitors. And I think they are. But if Ferrari were to match Red Bull in at least strategy, let alone car, they could be the two, like, you know, the next Vettel and Lewis. I think they're really good competitors, and I think they'd race really nicely next to each other. So I don't know, putting them in the same team would be a good idea.
I really do want to see Leclerc win with Ferrari, because there's one story that always breaks my heart when I hear it, that said that he signed for Ferrari. He told his father he signed for Ferrari before he actually did. And I just feel like he wants to win at Ferrari to sort of prove it to his father, prove it to everyone else, and I really want him to get...
And there's the connection to Jules as well.
Of course. Yeah, and it just makes me so mad. I don't want it to be seen as like bashing Carlos Sainz, because a lot of people seem to think that by saying that you think Ferrari are favouring Carlos Sainz in the pit stops, that you're basically bashing Carlos Sainz and saying it's Sainz's fault that Charles lost the race. I don't think that at all, but I think it's only right that we call out what seems to be unfair treatment of Charles Leclerc, because he has been so loyal to Ferrari. He has won races that nobody else would have won in that Ferrari, and yet they repay him by consistently giving him poor strategies and consistently treating him as a second driver, when we all know that he's a better driver than that.
If we ask you as a fan, what change you think needs to happen in terms of, is it a management change? Is it a driver change? Should he just leave the team, or do the team need to change?
It's tough, because I think after 15 years of failure, and that's what it is for Ferrari, you know, they have a winning DNA, but not anymore. I think it's hard to change their ways. But I just can't see him anywhere else on the grid. I think the only way that we're going to see any kind of change is if he does a risk that Lewis took, for example, when he left McLaren to go to Mercedes. But equally, that could work out like how Daniel Ricciardo left Red Bull to go to Renault, and that didn't work out the same way that he was kind of hoping. So there's always that risk there, but it's a tough one, and I mean, I just hope that Ferrari can kind of sort out their problems.
They're such a historically great team. It would be a shame to lose them, in terms of not lose them on the grid, but in terms of losing them from the top of the grid. It's a shame that they've fallen down.
Exactly, and I think consistency is one of the biggest problems, because some weekends I look at them and I think you are the second best team on this grid quite clearly, and then sometimes they do have the potential to be the second best team on the grid and they just throw it away, and it's just a real shame. Yeah,
it is a shame. And they weren't the only ones that had an unlucky weekend. There was a couple of disqualifications, one for Ferrari and one for Mercedes, which wasn't the nicest thing to read after you've just got P2 in a race. What do you think about those?
Again, I mean, I've just mentioned the word consistency about Ferrari, and I think that's something that we need to talk about here, because, you know, they pick every weekend only four or so cars to be inspected properly, and yet they picked the race winner, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, and
race winner P2, P3, and
P6. I believe he was 6. Yeah, I think
P5.
He was 6. Yeah, no, he was 5th before he got DSQ. Yeah, he was. And I mean, you know, they were saying that Leclerc had the pace to potentially podium this weekend. Obviously, Lewis was second and could have potentially won that race. I'm sure you're glad that instead of him actually winning that and then getting disqualified from that, it would be a lot more heartbreaking
to lose a win. But I do agree with the rules. You know, they are there for a reason, and I think it's fair to, if the car's not meeting the standards of the rules, then it's only fair to disqualify them.
But is there an argument to be had about maybe FIA consistency?
Yeah.
Certain drivers, they say that all drivers get checked at the end of the race, but only, 4 drivers were checked for the panel on the bottom of the car, and I just feel like...
And that's 4 different teams, but only one driver from each team, so surely both cars would have it.
Yeah, and then they did say as well that by the time that they could have potentially gone to check the second of the cars, like Sainz's car and Russell's car, they were already on the freight to Mexico, so they couldn't do that. And I mean, especially you've got to consider it specifically from Ferrari's standpoint here. They had a car running a higher deg, a more aggressive strategy. You would think that potentially there would have been more wear on that car. So I mean, I think it is unfair, but also you can't just expect them to disqualify the other car just purely because they've gone on the assumptions. But I get that it takes a lot of time to have a look at all the cars and make sure that they're all playing fair. I think if they're gonna go about it in the right way, I think they need to take a look at every single car and they need to make sure that they're within the rules, because I know people were upset when Sebastian Vettel got disqualified when he took a podium, I believe in the mad Hungary race where Lewis was the only car on the grid at one point, and he because of the fuel, and Aston said that they would have needed to actually break the car to be able to show that they had the fuel sample there, and it just wasn't viable for them. So I do think that they need to have a look at the way they kind of review like some of the cars, and I think there's multiple things really the FIA needs to look at. We've said sprint races, we've said looking at the car parts. I think some of the penalties sometimes are inconsistent.
It was linked to the sprint races as well, because there's obviously that discussion about when you do have sprint races, particularly at tracks like this, which do produce quite heavy wear on the cars, and you think it will make the cars wear out more when they have to do a sprint and then a race.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I do think that it's, you know, with the FIA, that it's always the hard argument, because you can argue that it's biased, but you always be arguing that it's biased for the team you don't support, which I'm sure all of us who all support different teams will say that the FIA has made a non-consistent decision, which they have. And I don't think that they always favour one team. I think there's just, in general, that they don't quite stick to the rules they set out for themselves. They'll punish a driver for one thing and then not punish another driver for the same thing. And then the next week it'll be a completely different driver that's not been punished. I don't think they necessarily follow a rule of always punishing one team, but I just don't think they are consistent.
If you think that Austin Grand Prix was crazy, then just wait until you hear about Mexico next week.
Yeah, what do we think about that and all the rumours? It's going to be a big week for Checo. It has to be.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
He needs this win. He really needs to prove his place at Red Bull, prove that he belongs there. Otherwise, I feel like his time is running out.
I do, and there have been a lot of rumours in the media lately. There's been rumours in the paddock of an ultimatum. If Sergio Perez doesn't get P2, it has been said that Red Bull are going to be replacing him with Danny Rick. This is obviously a rumour that Helmut Marko has denied the ultimatum. Sergio Perez has laughed off. He says he's got a contract and he's 100% certain he'll be racing for them next year. But we all know contracts don't always hold up,
especially at
Red Bull and with Danny Rick as well.
Didn't Helmut Marko also deny Danny Rick coming back to Red Bull, and then he came back to F1 obviously this season?
Yeah, he did. And, you know, he's not done badly. Obviously, we've not got to see much of him, especially with his injury. I think he's still got that drive in him.
I definitely think so. But the thing that I find kind of bizarre about the Daniel Ricciardo incident, the whole thing really, I mean, I look at the results this weekend. I know obviously it's his first race back, but 15th and 12th in the races. I mean, they're not particularly great results, although we do know that the AlphaTauri car this season is not particularly great.
No.
But the thing that confuses me the most is back in 2018 he left Red Bull. The whole kind of thing about like why he was leaving is because he wanted to be world champion, and he thought that he couldn't do that in the same team as Max Verstappen. And yet he's going back to that team, and Max Verstappen is a 2-time champion. And if he wasn't being favoured before in 2003 this year, yeah, well, I mean, you know, stranger things have happened. But yeah. Oh yes, of course.
Very recent, but
yeah. I'm so sorry. I'm completely on delay there.
Well, he hasn't had the trophy yet, so
yeah,
he is been crowned world champion, but he hasn't quite received the trophy.
It's because it happened on a Saturday.
We'll still get to celebrate that soon. Yeah,
it's the Saturday that threw me off there. I was like, oh yeah, no, we've still got a couple of races for that to happen. No, he's been champion for quite a while
it's
now.
a result we knew were coming, but I you know, I'm hoping he gets to celebrate properly and not just to.
Yeah,
I mean, last year it felt almost anticlimactic being told in that.
Yeah.
Just in the room, he didn't even know if he was, so it should be nice to have a proper celebration.
When's he going to win a normal one? You know, obviously we had 2021, which we won't go into with the Hamilton and Verstappen fan in the room. 2022 he won because they decided to give full points in a race that there was originally going to be half points.
It'd be nice to see him. It'd be nice for him, I think, to get the chance to win and like actually properly celebrate, and him knowing he's going to win. Like, I mean, I'm sure he knew he was going to win, but actually be told properly and not just half-hearted find out in a driver's room. I always feel bad for him in a way.
Exactly. And I mean, again, 3-time world champion, not 2. He's in a stronger position than what he is at Red Bull than what he was when Ricciardo first left the team, because he felt like he was out of favour with Horner and Marko and, you know, everybody else at Red Bull. And I just kind of question like his motive. And I know obviously he wants to race in F1, and I know that he I feel like Red Bull thinks it feels like a family to him, because I think that was the most important thing.
Especially with McLaren.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the interviews he's done since leaving McLaren, like, he said pretty much that he felt like a broken man after that. And I mean, I think going back to Red Bull, generally speaking, is a positive move for him.
Do you feel like he's maybe accepted that he's getting older and he might not win that World Championship at all? He might not win it with Red Bull, and he's sort of accepted that he'd rather just go back to the team that he had so much fun at, and just wants to end his career
on a high.
Yeah, he's like quite close friends with Max as well.
Exactly. No, I do agree, and I know that, you know, I think Horner looks out for him too, and I think you especially when you've had such a hard time in Formula One recently, you do want to end it in a family environment on a positive note.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think he'd fit in better.
I definitely think as well, you know, I mean, with Sergio Perez, like we was talking about, him potentially leaving. I mean, even in the season when Max Verstappen's been totally dominant, he's taken, is it 2 or 3 race wins this season?
2.
I believe it's 2.
I think it's 2.
I'm sure they were both on street tracks as well, as far as my memory goes. But
he is a master at street circuits, isn't he?
Exactly. But I mean, you've got a question. If we think who's the better driver of Perez or Ricciardo, you'd probably say Daniel Ricciardo.
Well, who would you want to see, Rebecca? You're a Red Bull fan, and I know you're a Max fan mostly, but do you want Perez to stay, or would you rather have Ricciardo?
I love Ricciardo as his presence on the grid. I feel like he's such a bubbly personality. Whatever team he goes to, he's going to make it, the environment, a massive 10 out of 10. And I do feel like Checo seems a little tired. I don't really think it's his fault. I feel like racing alongside a driver like Max, you know that Team Orders are always going to go for Max over you. And I feel like that's just worn him down a little bit. And it would be nice to see maybe a fresh start, a new driver, and also with Ricciardo, it will bring his sparkle back, it will bring his smile back, and I feel like it will be nice to see him end his career like that with Red Bull.
Yeah, I agree actually.
I definitely think so as well. And I mean, what's next for Perez then? Because you'd assume if Red Bull were going to get rid of him, they'd potentially demote him to AlphaTauri, but by the sounds of that rumour, it might be...
probably the rumour's sort of suggesting it'll be Lawson. If obviously this is all speculation, but I think Lawson put in a really great drive actually, and
I think, you know, his performances, the Zandvoort race in the wet as a rookie, you know, where he got points, I think was just showed his quality. And I mean, I wasn't particularly aboard the Lawson hype train. I know a lot of people were fans of him in Formula 2 and DTM, but I wasn't particularly sold on what I'd seen. And I saw people saying it was a little bit of an injustice, and I thought, I'm not too sure. And then he jumped in when needed and delivered some great performances. So I'd be quite excited to see a bit more of him, and hopefully AlphaTauri or whatever they rebrand to next season, because apparently that sponsorship is up and they're looking for another one. And the rumours are potentially Hugo Boss, potentially some other kind of closed brands as they're sticking with. But I think that could be a good move.
I think Lawson's a really great example of grasping the opportunity at hand, because he knew he was on a limited time. He knew he was waiting until Danny Rick healed and came back. I think he really understood what his job was and how he had to prove himself. Not next season, I think the season after he'll be on the grid. I think any team would want him after that.
I'd love to see that, yeah.
I also think as well, the thing that he's got going for him, even if he doesn't go to AlphaTauri next season, is potentially other teams on the grid might want to take a look at him, even though he is in the Red Bull Academy.
Yeah.
And unlike Nick de Vries, who we saw obviously depart midway through this season, he has more than one race under his belt, so people have been able to see how consistently he has performed, even in how many races was it? Was it 3 or 4?
Well, I know they said that Danny Rick hadn't been seen since July. A couple of months.
Yeah.
How many races? But it was a couple of months.
So, I mean, even if the AlphaTauri move doesn't work out, he's got a lot of doors open for him in motorsport at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I honestly think that, especially with Formula 1, there's not very many chances, and when one comes along, you have to use it to the fullest.
There's been a lot of talk about, you know, who the second team on the grid is. You know, as much as there's been a lot of disappointment around this season with the dominance of Red Bull and in particular Verstappen, we've had McLaren obviously recently. Aston started the season, as we've mentioned earlier on. Ferrari, Mercedes, they've all really been in the fight. There's been rumours recently that you guys wanted to speak about.
By 2025, Andretti could be the 11th team on the grid.
And they could be bringing Colton Herta along with them, having an American on the grid.
See, I don't know much about him, but what do you guys know?
I know, I mean, I watch IndyCar quite a lot. I mean, I still am a beginner in that sense because I've just finally figured out how the points work. Their point system is insane. But I like Colton Herta. I think he struggled this season in IndyCar, but he is a talent. I would say, you compare at the moment Logan Sargent on the grid, he's coming into Mexico off of the back of getting points at home, first F1 points, but I think he's been a little bit disappointing in a Williams car that has definitely improved. I think Alex Albon is an exceptional driver, don't get me wrong, but I think it would be wrong to say that Williams is one of the worst teams on the grid anymore because they're not. I think Herta is definitely a better driver than Sargent to me.
And would you say, like, we've got 3 American races on the grid, do you think we should have a second American driver?
Definitely. I feel like it'll be really nice because I feel like every driver deserves to have a chance to get their home race, and it would be so nice to see a couple of Americans maybe even battling each other, for a win at Vegas, a win at the Circuit of the Americas. It would be so lovely.
Especially because if you're going to have so many tracks in the same place, it'd be nice to see a little bit more representation for that country. We've got 3 British drivers but 1 British Grand Prix, and that's such a good weekend. There's so many fans there for so many different drivers. It must be nice to have that, 3 American races and only 1 American driver who's got 3 home races. I'm sure he'd like a friend.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Colton Herta himself, he is from Santa Clarita in California, and there has been races in California state in the past. They had Long Beach, they've had quite a few races. They've got, Laguna Seca is a great track. I don't think it's particularly an F1 track, but it is a great track for motor racing. And I mean, there's potential, and I know a lot of people complain about the expansion of the calendar. I do personally think there are too many races. Again, I think that's another thing. But I do also understand why America is getting more races because, there's 300 million people in that country alone. They need to look at expanding the audience, and my bigger complaint would be why they're not all spaced together on the calendar, I think, rather than them being...
It would make sense.
Exactly. I mean, going to Miami in May, then going back to Europe for 2 races, then to Canada, and then waiting until October, November time to go to Austin and Las Vegas and places like that.
I see why they put Vegas so late in the grid. It does seem like a showdown.
And also Vegas in the summer would probably kill everybody.
Yeah,
it's so hot.
I also think as well, congestion wise, I don't think many people would be very happy considering they're racing down the Vegas Strip, and I don't think it'd do a lot for their tourism. But I mean, I'm quite excited for Vegas in a couple of weeks. I'm not so sure how I feel about the time zones as a European, but I'm quite excited. And I mean,
I love a night race. I think it's so beautiful to watch.
Absolutely.
I'm excited for that.
As long as it's an improvement on Miami, because I don't think many of us here are the biggest fans of Miami. You may disagree, but...
No, it was the fake water that got me, the fake
Marina. I think Miami was so entertainment based, and it was so done up to be like this amazing event and not a sports race.
Yeah, I agree. I also think as well that could have potentially benefited from being a night race.
It could have.
But I mean, I think then maybe you'd wonder where they're...
It was the police escorts to the podium that got me. I thought that was so funny.
And the driver entrances.
Yeah, but as long as there's not kind of that jazz around Andretti, and I mean, there has been a lot of complaints about Andretti coming into F1. I think a lot undeserved. I think Lewis Hamilton has said it's undeserved, and he's quite excited to see them.
I think with Formula 1 being such an exclusive sport, another team, I understand the danger of another 2 cars on track. It's a very, certain tracks are very squashed together, and there is a danger there, but there's only 20 people that ever get to race in Formula 1. It'd be nice to at least extend it to 22.
And it'd be nice to shake things up a bit, have a new team and see where they stand on the grid and see, how well they can do.
Exactly, and run by a family with pedigree in motor racing and F1 in particular. Mario Andretti, former world champion, Michael Andretti, who was, until Sargent this weekend, the last American point scorer in Formula 1. So it'll be good to see, that kind of name on the grid. And I mean, they quite have a pedigree in IndyCar as well, so to see them come over to F1 I think will be quite good for the sport, and especially good for the American audience that they're trying to keep, and as the sport grows.
Now of course it is all still speculation at this point, but on that note, what's everyone's craziest prediction for Mexico this weekend?
I wouldn't exactly call it crazy, but I would definitely love to see Piastri take a win. It would be incredible. maybe with Norris, do have a little 1-2 there.
Yeah, that would be really nice to see,
Yeah.
actually.
I think so.
What's your craziest prediction, Eden?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit out there, but I think potentially we could be seeing an Alfa Romeo in the top 10.
And which one do you think it'll be?
It's tough to say because I do think in the crucial moments, as good as I think, or as surprising as I think potentially he's been to some people, not to me, because again, following his career for a long time, I've seen how good Guan Yu Zhou has been. I think Bottas has got the better of him most times in the head-to-head. I could see Zhou getting some points this weekend.
Yeah, I'd like to see him as well.
I could equally see Bottas getting some points.
Yeah.
It feels like a long time since I've heard Valtteri Bottas' no mention or commentary in the race. So
And
it'd
I've
be
always
nice to see.
liked him.
Yeah.
I've never thought he was a bad guy.
Exactly, and I do think that is a good stable lineup that they've got there, and I'm not sure if they've both been confirmed for next year yet, but I do think
they have, yeah.
Yeah, but I think stability is key, and I know people have said about potentially Teo Porcher coming in and replacing one or the other, but I think they've got something good going on at Alpha, and although the car particularly isn't great, I think they've got two good drivers there, and I think on the day, Mexico could potentially be that day where one or both is fortunate enough to be able to be in a position where they get points.
I'd say for me, it's probably not what any Mexican fan wants to hear, but I do think it may be a Perez DNF this weekend. He's got a lot of drive, but a lot of pressure on him, and I think it's a recipe for disaster. I don't think he was going to take the win anyway, but he may have too much on his shoulders and make a driver error.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly sad but reasonable prediction to be making.
I mean, Formula 1 does put a lot on the shoulders of certain drivers. Depending on the week, it changes. I'm sure Norris has got a lot of pressure at the moment on him as well. And you can see that sometimes with the small, tiny errors. I think it could happen, unfortunately.
Way to end the podcast on a downer for any
Yes,
potential Mexican viewers that we have or listeners.
Right, well, let's bring you back up and give you your timings for the Mexican Grand Prix, should we? So,
Yes.
On the Friday, kicking off practice 1 at 7:30, and then we've got practice 2 at 11
Is that PM?
PM, yeah.
Oh God. Late night for some UK viewers.
Yeah.
An amazing Saturday though.
Yeah, I mean the practice starts at 6:30. An hour practice on Saturday before we go into qualifying at 10 o'clock, and that could be make or break for Sergio Perez this weekend.
Yeah,
and
it could be.
I mean it could be the start of the end, really.
Start that's a powerful phrase. I like that. Well, I shouldn't. I mean, it's not a nice phrase, but you landed it well. And the race is at 8 p.m. on the Sunday.
These are, of course, all UK times, as you can probably tell, since we are all based in the UK.
Yes, we are a Bournemouth-based podcast.
And if you'd like to check us out, then you can listen to us on Spotify under the F1 Era and also under Nerve Radio, Nerve Podcasts.
And you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the F1 Era.
Check out Instagram and Twitter for Nerve Radio. And if you'd like to contact us, then you can email studio@nervemedia.org.uk.
Or the F1 Era at outlook.com. We thank you so much for listening though, and we can't wait to be back here discussing what's happened in Mexico this weekend.